there is a way that you can monetize your podcast and get a sponsor even before you click publish, but it does require strategy, and that also includes branding, visual elements, and marketing. Everyone should keep in mind that chart rankings are a vanity metric. They give an indication of success, but not the only indication of success. We have found it more effective to focus our efforts for paid spend budgets in podcast apps, because those two places are immediately where your podcast listeners are.
Welcome to another episode of Smarter Podcasting with me, your host, Neil Mackay, the podcast guy. I started my first podcast in 2019 for a hobby because I was bored one day and I absolutely loved podcasts. From there, that podcast is now in the top 5% of podcasts worldwide, and we've just hit 120,000 downloads. All organic marketing, which is important when we get to this episode. I then took what I learned in that podcast and I created 7 Million Byte Podcasts, where we are now an end-to-end podcast production agency. We can help with everything from producing, recording your podcast here in the Saigon Podcast Studio if you're in Vietnam, all the way through to editing, producing, promotion, publishing, everything, artwork, anything at all that you need. So if you do want to work with me and you want to work with 7 Million Bytes Podcast, please go to 7millionbytes.com. You can click the link there to work with me. But in this show, Smarter Podcasting, I share with you as much as I can about everything I've learned along the way, all the mistakes, the tips and the tricks. And I also talk to industry experts to help you make the best podcast possible. Now, in this episode, I am maybe more excited than I've ever been. And I feel like I'm always overexcited. I'm always telling you I'm excited for this new episode. But this one is a big one. This is a real industry heavy hitter. And she just told me before we started recording that she actually listens to this show, which blows me away. And it shouldn't, because she works for Podglomerate. They've recently just been recognized as the best podcast marketing and production company, which I'm very jealous about, because that is where we want 7 Million Bytes Podcast to be one day. So watch out, we're coming for you. But they actually listed Smarter Podcasting as one of the top podcasts about podcasting, and especially for people who want to start a podcast. So that being recognized for that, I was just explaining that is literally in a plaque in the front entrance to the studio. It's one of the most amazing achievements I've ever had in my life. And then to be able to talk to that person today from Podglomerate, and if I heard to tell me she listens to this show, has absolutely blown me away. So get ready for this episode, because what you're going to learn today is maybe one of the most important things you need to learn about podcasting. Podcast marketing is one of the most important things when it comes to your podcast. And many, many people, I would say most people, including myself, think that it doesn't really exist, to be honest. No, most people don't do it. I get approached all the time, like, how can I make my podcast go viral? People want to monetize their podcast before they've even started. And they really are thinking about those unicorns, those needles in a haystack, that 0.1% of podcasts just started in the front room and became massive. That just doesn't happen to everyone. And the ones that do make it are because they put a lot of time and effort, not just into the show, but into marketing. So go back and listen to the episode with Gary. He talks about he's had 50 million, is it 60 million, 50 million downloads. He talks about the marketing that he did to get that show to where it is. So enough from me. My guest is an expert in this. She's going to share exactly what you need to do. She is the Senior Vice President of Marketing and Audience Development at the Podglomerate, who awarded us that amazing recognition on our blog of being one of the best podcasts. I'll just say that. I'm not sure if that's what it says, but one of the best podcasts about podcasting, very meta. She's guided audience growth for the world's top podcasts and brands, including Netflix, Harvard, NPR, and the Boston Globe, just among a few of them. I'm sure you've heard of most of them. And she's also a 15-year NPR veteran and creative force. And she's used innovative marketing and storytelling, which has actually earned her awards from the Murrow, Gracie, and Webby Awards, plus national recognition from Bloomberg. My guest today is Joni Deutsch. Joni, this is an absolute pleasure. Thank you for coming on Smarter Podcasting.
Thank you so much. Also, the best intro I think I've had for a podcast. So I should just bring you around with me to conferences. Like, you can be my hype man for those moments.
You are very welcome. Thank you so much. Well, let's get into it. So tell me about the Podglomerate, because I told you we're coming for you. I'm very impressed with what you do. Tell me what the Podglomerate does and why Silly Moving Bikes podcast is coming for you.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know about the latter there, but I will say that for those who may not be aware about the Podglomerate, so we are an award-winning services firm, like Neil said. We've been around for nearly a decade. We do podcast production, marketing, and monetization. And we have been able to work with a wide variety of shows and genres, brands, and publishers in nearly a decade's time. Whether it's an institution like Harvard and Stanford, a Fortune 100 company like CBS or Microsoft, or major media brands and publishers from public radio stations in the US, including NPR and PBS, but also for-profit media companies like the Boston Globe. It's been wonderful to just stretch our creativity because we're working on multiple shows and clients all at one go. So I could take a meeting in the morning with true crime, chart-topping true crime podcast that Stephen King loves. And then in the afternoon, I'm looking at an ad brief for a health investigative series that is more science focused. So it's dynamic work, it's amazing work. And the results we've been able to see from launching a show when there was nothing to its name, helping with the branding of it, the marketing of it, the post-production of it, the ad sales, and getting it to the point where it is a chart-topping, critically acclaimed series. It's satisfying. It's knowing that we can make an impact in the audio industry, not just for producers and hosts, but also for content creators to have a living and audiences to be able to enjoy and walk away from a piece of audio saying, wow, I'm going to do something today because of that.
And it start with the most important question, I think. Can you create a successful podcast without doing any marketing?
I think there would have been a better chance of that if this were in 2010, the year 2000, basically when podcasting was not as zeitgeisty, which I teach this subject a lot in classes. And, really 2014 was the first inflection point for podcasting, the major inflection point. That was when the True Crime Podcast serial came out in November of that year. That is when, if you look at Google search results, you can immediately see a massive spike when people, and that's it. Basically the point where people said, not only I want to create podcasts, but I want to listen to podcasts and enjoy them. And since then, it's just continued to grow and grow with listenership, the number of shows out there, whether it's a dormant show that maybe they did a few episodes, they stopped, or it's an active show that's been around for a while. So yeah, if you'd done it before 2014 without any organic marketing and it was not an inundated marketplace for content, I'd say without lifting a finger, you could have done more. But that's not the case anymore, right? Just like with general media and journalism out there, there's so many things that consume your time and your eyes and your ears, from TikTok to Apple Podcast app. And when you have no shortage of options, it means that you, the creator, need to also be a marketer or hire a marketing service like the Podglomerate to be able to make sure that we're hitting the target audience, because not everyone listening in the world as a podcast fan is going to be your target audience. Even the most popular shows in the world, like Joe Rogan or Call Her Daddy, they aren't listened to by every single person in the world. So it's unrealistic for you to think the same. And then two, to make sure that you're actually doing things that are strategic, worthy of your time and bandwidth, because you can't be everywhere all at once. You can't have 20,000 social media accounts and posted them in a way that's productive. So there are targeted marketing techniques that, knowing your audience, knowing your goals, knowing your bandwidth, can really tie in together to make sure that you can do things without, spending a lot of money on organic marketing.
Do you think that for most people that are starting a podcast, they don't even consider the marketing part of it?
Yeah. I started my career 15 years ago with public radio. It was also a different time and space in media and audio and podcasting. But there was an idea at the time, and I think a lot of the media industry have this as well in podcasting, that if you build it, they will come. The Field of Dreams quote, where all you need to do is create and produce audio or media or storytelling, and the audience will find you because your content's so good, right? Surely they're going to know that. It was silly then, and it's become sillier now and unrealistic, that all you need to do is press publish and have 1 million downloads in a day, a week, a year, a decade. It's just not the case anymore. So no, it is just as important then as it is now to not only have a sound production strategy and content strategy, the guests you're bringing on, the equipment that you're using, how long your season or episodes are for episode consumption rates and the like. But production aside, it's also important to have a sound marketing and audience growth strategy to be able to complement that, work hand in hand with it, and amplify your work in a way where it's not just hoping that people listen, it's knowing that some amount of people are going to listen, and that is going to grow over time.
One of the podcasts that we work with, they do pharmaceutical marketing. And one of the things I loved he talked about was the only reason that Coca-Cola is the most popular drink in the world, it's just brown sugar, fizzy water. It's because of the amount of money they spend on marketing. And I remember years ago, I think, Piccadilly Circus in London, it's all the lights, kind of like Times Square of London. There's a big Coke ad there that's been there forever. And I think they spend something like 30 million a year. I might be making that up, or maybe that was 10 years ago. It's probably 100 million now, who knows? But they spend an inordinate amount of money just to have an ad on Piccadilly Circus. And you're like, if these brands that everybody knows Coke, but they know they have to spend a shit ton of money just to stay front of mind.
It's money. It's also time, right? Because Coke has been around for quite some time, just like Pepsi, just like Nike, a lot of major brands. So similar to your production studio, by being able to say that you're the first or the longest running of its kind in its field, in its country, in its region, that can help set you up for success. And that builds and builds over time, just like an investment. So yes, I mean, it's not just like Coke spends a lot of money in its branding, its sales, its influencers, its content. I would not be surprised if they create a branded podcast in the near future to get into this territory, just like everyone else in the world. But like sometimes it really is a matter of if you were first, then you're going to be there the longest and people will remember that. And then it just becomes synonymous. If I pick up a Post-it note, I may not actually pick up a Post-it note, the brand. I'm just picking up what I consider as a sticky note because Post-it really put their name to it. Everything I have is a Post-it note if it's paper.
Now, I don't want to make people feel bad because I feel like maybe you're starting to listen to this and you might be thinking, well, I didn't think about marketing, or I feel bad. I didn't think about it. I still don't think about it enough. And I think for most people, they start a podcast, they want to do it because they love it. They're maybe not thinking, maybe in the back of their mind, they're like, maybe it's going to blow up. Maybe I'm going to be super famous. I don't know how many people started thinking that it's going to blow up. But one of the things I learned recently over the last couple of years is, which made me feel better, is the amount of money, time, effort, and strategy that the big guns put into it. And what somebody explained to me was, okay, everyone's like, Joe Rogan's the #1 podcast in the world. He got $100 million contract, but he probably spends, like, they're making this number up, but maybe spends 40% of it on advertising and marketing. If Joe Rogan wants to be, or his team, I'm sure it's not him, but if his team want to be #1 next week, they just pump in an extra bit of money on advertising and marketing, and sure enough, he's #1. So we all look at the charts. Everyone gets jealous. I know I do. You look at Call Her Daddy, look at Conan O'Brien, look at Amy Poehler, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, there's a thing in common here with all of these podcasts. What's that thing in common? And explain to me, what do they do and how do they do it?
Well, first is celebrity status, right? These aren't people that are just, they had no digital presence. They had nothing to their name prior to becoming a podcaster, hitting the top of the charts. They had an established reputation and experience, background in media, whether television or film, or, they have been doing this for quite some time. Now, Amy Poehler's podcast is pretty much new. It just launched in 2025. But other shows like Joe Rogan, they've been around for a while, right? So it really wasn't overnight. There was audience growth likely to begin with. They brought a pre-existing audience to their new podcast, and they've continued to grow that because of, repetition, consistency, knowing that there's a growing relationship with the audience. They know what to expect. It's going to be released every Tuesday or every other Wednesday. And just, month over month, they can see the numbers rising. Now, of course, money, you're right. I mean, they're with, in some cases, very major networks. Conan with SiriusXM, Joe Rogan, who's previously with Spotify in a larger capacity. Alex with Call Her Daddy is obviously SiriusXM as well. So yes, there's also the big brand or publisher that they're attached to, which usually means bigger distribution opportunities, ads that are running in major ways like at Times Square, New York City. But here's what I would just say, because you brought up a great note about looking at the chart rankings and sometimes feeling small or your work is minuscule by comparison of larger shows or host names. Everyone should keep in mind that chart rankings are a vanity metric. They are almost like the New York Times bestseller list. They give an indication of success, but not the only indication of success. Because a chart ranking, whether you're looking at Apple or Spotify or even YouTube, it's not based off of like, this is the most listened to show in the world. In some cases, it's simply the show or the latest episode was, encouraging a lot of clicks, maybe not a lot of listens. They had maybe subscribers that were joining for the first time. There's a few different metrics that come together to show that. Not necessarily you, but a person out there could rig that. So they could get to the top of the charts without millions of downloads, millions of subscribers, millions of episodes. That's really up to you to decide out there if you think that's the right course of action. I think at the end of the day, if you truly are wanting to build something sustainable and something worth your time and effort, then it's thinking of what your goals are. Do you want a show that resonates with a true audience, a true listener? Or do you want maybe more of a vanity metric of, even if it's maybe more of a bot or maybe more of a click, but not a true engagement, you get to the top of the charts and you're seen as such. Devil's advocate, a chart ranking can help you build audience authentically. So it can tie into each other if you wanted to market it that way.
This leads me perfectly to my next question, which is one of, how do I say this, the most frustrating things that I find in the industry maybe, and I want to get your take on this. We've all had it. We all get it. We get a message dropped in our inbox. I have so many in my spam folder. I checked my spam folder the other day. There was all these messages that I didn't even know were there. And they say, "Oh, hello, sir or madam. I love your content. I love your podcast. We could help with organic promotion on Apple and Spotify. Are you interested in this?" Tell me, what are they offering?
That is exactly what I was politely referring to just a moment ago. There is a growing field, especially in recent years, of individuals who are able to rig the system in ways. So if you pay them, usually it's pretty affordable, to be frank. A couple $100, a few dollars, $1,000. They're able to, it's not one size fits all, but in a lot of cases, they're able to generate false audience or listenership. And that engagement, so being able, just like with bots, being able to click on your podcast feed, click on an episode, download it, it can cause the apps to see your podcast in a new way, where then it's chart ranking. It's hitting the top of the news and politics charts, the all podcast charts. But that's not going to necessarily, majority of the time, it's not going to lead to like a carousel feature in Apple Podcast. It's not going to lead to, the show being pitched to Joe Rogan for you to be a guest on that show or another prominent show. Again, vanity metric, but that is a form of paid advertising or a paid consultant work that if you get a spam email like that, I would encourage you to really look into it and think if that's worth your time and money. And if it's legitimate, just like with scams of any kind of email, right? But Bloomberg and a few other major outlets have reported on that kind of tactic in recent years. And sometimes it takes the form of a platform actually reaching out, not just an individual person that can do this for you. So mileage may vary as to success or what you need out of it.
I would encourage you just not to do it.
But let me just say, it is something that when we think of for our Podglomerate clients, when we're talking about their goals of success, if they want downloads, if they want listeners, we are focusing on legitimate, authentic growth goals and measurement of it. Yeah. So we don't look into that, but I'm not your parent. I'm not telling you don't do it. Just be wise as you're looking at that.
I'm not your parent, but I'm telling you, don't do it. At the end of the day, if you want numbers, most people, you want numbers because you want more sponsors, right? And I coach people on this as well. Just forget about sponsorship. It's only for the big brands, top 10%, the top 1%. You need $29 per 1,000 listens is the average CPM, which we can, maybe that's false. You can tell me more about that in a minute. But you should sell your own services if you're a small niche podcaster. But if you do want to get sponsors, and we've had a couple of sponsors for Discover Vietnam, they want to see your stats. And that's why I use Buzzsprout. I can easily go into my stat and I can say, here's our audience. Here's where they're listening from, what device they're using. Then I can go into Apple Podcasts and Spotify Connect and find out their age and everything. So now I know my age of my audience, blah, blah, blah. If you want sponsorship and you show them that and they look and they see that 10% of your listeners are from Bangladesh, you can't delete that unless you Photoshop it. Like that's in bare. You can't contact Buzzsprout and be like, can you take that stat off? That is not going to look good. And you're not going to get sponsorship from that.
Well, it's even just the larger note of when you're doing ads in your podcast feed, there's likely a pixel attached to it or an attribution capability. So the advertiser in question, so Visit Vietnam, BetterHelp, Casper Mattresses, whatever the case is, they're able to see on their platform, on their side, the conversion rate of how many people are listening to that audio ad in that podcast feed and coming over to their website or coming over to their brand or property or link to become a consumer, a client, maybe another podcast listener if they do a podcast. And again, if you're inflating numbers with people that are not people listening to that podcast or clicking on it, but not engaging with the content, the advertiser is going to know simply because they're not seeing a return on investment for the money they put into an ad on your podcast. So do you think that that advertiser is going to come back to you for more campaigns in the future or give you more money because of how great the results were? I mean, nearly 0% chance that's going to happen. That they're going to say, yes, absolutely, we want bots to listen to our ad. So yeah, I mean, that's a larger consideration of, yes, you could do this and maybe you feel great about the numbers, but realistically, this is not the way to grow a show that's viable for your long-term success.
And I think a lot of people just won't know, right? You get this thing dropped in your inbox and it's like, hey, I'll get you like all these downloads. I mean, I've seen it like $50 somewhere, like really, really cheap. And so it is a bit of a scam. And just, yeah, if you are listening, if you are considering it, not if you are listening, but obviously listening, if you can hear the words coming out of my mouth right now. But if you're understanding what I'm saying, if you get those messages in your inbox, and I get them on LinkedIn, I get them on Facebook, I get them in email, I get them in all sorts of ways. And I'm going to share something that probably makes me look really bad, but I got a bit annoyed the other day and somebody sent this message with again on LinkedIn. And I said to them, I'm just, I used to do stand-up comedy. I was trying to be a bit funny. I said, I will do this, but I'll pay you with a unicorn. How can I send you a unicorn? Something like that. Because I was like, you're basically giving me something that doesn't exist. And then I felt bad because they misunderstood what I said. And they went, oh no, we don't accept unicorn payment, but we take PayPal. And I was thinking, sorry, I meant I will send you an actual unicorn. What's your address? And then they were like, oh no, we don't accept unicorns as payment. And I was like, okay, cool. I don't accept fake down. So something that I don't even think it said that, to be honest. You're laughing. You're like, well,
I think it's great. And I think should you engage with others, you should make it a whole family of currency rates. So there's the leprechaun, there's the the narwhal's real. What should I say? I was going to say Loch Ness monster. use objects that are not correct. I mean, look, if anything you take away from this conversation today for those listening, which you are listening because you're listening, I know it. It's that there are better ways and easier ways, legitimate ways, and even free ways, if not relatively cheap ways, that you can grow your audience that truly is going to matter more, not just to yourself, your producers, your advertisers, but to your audience. So I'm sure we're going to get into that too next.
Well, that's what I want to get into. But before we get into that, the ways that you can actually legitimately promote your podcast and market your podcast, you mentioned something that I only found out about this year. I did not know existed. I didn't fully understand how podcasts could even monetize. Because sometimes you're like, do they really make money off of this ad? And when I found out what this was, it blew my mind technologically, philosophically, and I didn't even know it existed. I'm talking about something you mentioned called a pixel. What the hell is a pixel and what does it do? How does it work?
So another way I describe it, so we all, I would say, are internet savvy at this point, and you're probably familiar with the word cookie, right? So not just a cookie you eat, but a cookie on a website, where if you go to a website, let's say you're shopping at J. Crew, Gap, Old Navy. You go to their website, you check out their page, you're like, I want to buy a shirt today. And you decide, you know what, actually, I'm good. I'm going to leave the website and just go about my day, go elsewhere on the internet. Well, that cookie follows you from that website and you start seeing ads or you start engaging the content elsewhere, even if you're not on that original website. The pixel is very similar to that. In audio terms, it's basically a way where whether another podcast, a brand, an advertiser is able to put a, let's say, cookie in this case, in your podcast feed for that ad that's running in your feed. And in exchange, using a platform, an attribution platform, we refer to it as, which can range from platforms like Chartable to Magellan to Swap FM. There's so many out there. The advertiser or external show in question is able to see what is that ad running in your feed, how it's converting audience, so percentage of conversion, unique conversions, unique listens, unique users, downloads. So they know if we paid $25 CPM, or if we're expecting a certain number of impressions of that spot to run, are we getting to that? Are we getting the most out of our budget or the most out of this collaboration? Because a pixel or a spot that's running could not only be something that you pay for, so a paid ad, a sponsorship. You can use a pixel to monitor the success of a cross promo or a feed drop or a guest swap or a guest interview. So it can expand beyond paid advertising. You can understand how it's useful for your own earned free marketing techniques to know, hey, I was interviewed on Neil's podcast, and if I gave him a pixel in advance, he put in the episode, I can see like if that audience really likes me or my messaging or my brand, I should look into doing maybe a paid ad on his podcast in the future, or we should do more interviews or cross promotions of ad swaps. There's so many ways a pixel can be used to know, is your audience what you're doing or really what you're gearing for ads and promotions? And also just, you can impress your monetizers, your ad reps out there saying, hey, like, I know I have the good stuff. Here's my usual conversion rate when I do ads with other brands like yourself.
How does that tie in then to the $29 CPM that I mentioned, the cost per mile, the $29 per 1,000 listeners, which, to be honest, I mean, I know the stats. If you have 1,000 listeners per episode, you're in the top 1% immediately.
Yeah, usually we go off of and there's a little nuance to it, but obviously that stat you're reciting, it's taking from not every podcast in the landscape. It is only taking from a certain subset that are hosted on a certain few platforms. So bear that in mind, that it is, yes, an industry like 1% ranking, I guess you could call it, or 7%, 10% ranking. If you think the stat is if 7,000 downloads within, or a certain number of downloads in a 7-day period. Sorry, nuance of that. But if you're talking about CPMs, I think the big thing to consider is that from our dealings in space, when my marketing team are going out and we may have a budget approved from a client we represent, they say, hey, we have $20,000 to spend to promote our podcast, along with all your initiatives for marketing publicity. Give us a proposal for what kinds of shows or apps or newsletters we should spend this money on for ads promoting our show. For audio ads, we try to keep to somewhere between 25-ish CPM. We can go up to 30 to 40. It sometimes varies depending on the type of show we're requesting ad rate cards from. Premium shows, so premium being like the Kara Swishers of the world, New York Times of the world, like really big publishers and very popular shows, they're likely going to charge a higher CPM because they know their value. Or it may be a certain time of year, right? We're getting into the winter holidays at the time of this recording. And typically CPMs do increase towards the tail end of a calendar year in November, December, because advertisers know, or ad sales teams know, that this is when people really want to get the word out, like for shopping deals and all sorts of, like just general end of year calendar bit discounts. So also timing's key. If you're wanting to run an ad for your podcast or have someone buy an ad on your podcast, just consider when that ad would be running, because the CPM is likely going to be higher up in Q4 and it'll be lower at different parts of the year. And it's usually negotiable. So just because you see a CPM that's $29, it doesn't hurt to go back to that person and say, hey, I think the industry average right now may be a little, lower, or we've dealt with other brands that have lower CPMs. How can we meet in the middle? Everything's a negotiation nowadays.
You did mention CPM, we're talking that 1,000 downloads in for 7 days, 30 days, whatever it is. It is for the top 10%, 1%, whatever you want to call it. So for the other 90%, as I advise to people, it's not realistic. You can maybe get some local sponsorship. You might get some niche sponsorship. You could sell your own services. So the point of this episode is to share with people, how can they market their podcast? Lots of people want to grow, right? And by growth, they want monetization. Let's be honest. Nobody's like, I just want 10,000 downloads so I can show off. They want 10,000 downloads so they can monetize and make money. And I mean, I've been so lucky to turn my hobby into my business. I did make a decision early on, very early on. I said, I'm not going to monetize my podcast. That's not going to be my business. I was like, I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to do it well. If I went all in on Discover Vietnam, and I made that my 40 hours a week, 60 hours a week, that's not 60, but I made that my full week. I absolutely believe I could buy it successfully, right? Because that's what happens if you put your mind to something. The reason I didn't was one, I'm not in Vietnam forever, I don't think. I might be, but I don't know. And then especially 5 years ago, I didn't know what was happening, especially with COVID, right? So for me, I was like, if I'm going to do it, I'm not going to go into monetizing my podcast. How can I make money from podcast though? Podcast production. There's always going to be a need for someone to make a podcast for someone else. And it was thanks to my wife as well. She's like, you've learned so much making your own podcast. That's valuable to other people. And so that's kind of where it all started and how we're growing to where we are today. And we're going to keep growing. And that was a conscious decision. But I'm not saying it's a wrong decision for someone. If you do want to go all in on your podcast and you want to make that your full-time business, you want to get to the point where you can quit your job and your job is a podcaster like Gary. And it was amazing hearing his story of how that was his goal and he set out to do it. How do you go from a less than 90% podcaster who's still getting great downloads, but you're nowhere near sponsorship, you're nowhere near quitting your job? How do you market your podcast to quit your job, I guess, is my question.
And I'll start with answering one of the other comments you shared before I get into like the best marketing tactics, because you brought up a great note about sponsorship and just monetization, like being able to create a career out of this or sustain your livelihood, your family, your house, your mortgage, all that from it. And I would just note that years ago when I worked and I hosted my own podcast for public media, we were able to get a 5, if not 6-figure sponsorship deal before the show even launched, before the show even had a single download. It was published anywhere. We already had that confirmed. What helped was a few things though. One was that we had test audio that sounded great, and we had a great sales pitch, a deck, and you had myself as host actually being able to share how this was important and relevant to the ad sales person in question and their team, including branding, being able to have the artwork, like a visual presence, and already showing all of this, basically pre-made materials, and saying, here's why this show is going to be amazing. It's going to be award-winning. It's going to get listens and acclaim, and why you should be the first person to sponsor it. And all of those things happened. It got the awards, it got the acclaim, it got the listens, and it got the sponsorship locked in. And they were actually on the ground floor enough that we could incorporate their logo into our work and into the sound of the podcast on the very first day. So just saying that for a word of encouragement out there, that there is a way that you can monetize your podcast and get a sponsor even before you click publish, but it does require strategy. And that also includes branding, visual elements, and marketing know-how. So to the larger question of what are the things you can do to get to that higher level of success, whether it's downloads or monetization efforts, the like, there's a few things. One is at the heart of it, knowing who your audience is and how your podcast relates to them and where to find them. So again, knowing, what are their favorite newsletters? What are their favorite podcasts they listen to? How does your visual branding stand out in your genre space? If you go to the Apple Podcasts genre chart to see what other shows, maybe your spirituality podcast, how do other spirituality podcasts look and sound? And do you fit in that? And how can you also stand apart at the same time? Those are key, because then okay, if my podcast audience, they are 20 to 30 something year olds who like to travel and who are more so on TikTok and Instagram than LinkedIn, Facebook, and X, Twitter, then for social media strategy, you should be on their platforms they like to be on to get your content and clips out there. And if they like certain podcasts or newsletters, maybe they subscribe to Afar, maybe they subscribe to Scott's Cheap Flights, Going, maybe they listen to podcasts from Condé Nast, then you should reach out to those shows and newsletters, maybe to do cross promos. And again, that's free. You essentially just say to that external partner, hey, I also have a travel show. I have a similar audience. I have similar guests. Maybe we've shared content, even though we didn't know it, with types of, topics or themes or guests. I would love to do a cross promo with you. If you promote my show in your feed or newsletter, I'll do the same in my channels or on my podcast. And if you have an attribution platform in place, you can send and receive pixels so you can monitor the success of those ads running. And again, little swaps like that, whether it's big networks and shows, small ones, I can make a world difference. But it's key to know who your audience is and also what is your pitch. If you have 30 seconds or a paragraph to describe what you do, why it matters, why someone should listen or engage as a partner, a cross promo, then you need to have that amazing language set up and ready to go. So that way someone receiving it's going to say, yeah, that's actually what I want to listen to and who I want to partner and market with.
One thing I think that always gets missed out, and it ties back into what I was saying about if you want to do this, if you want to go all in, commit to it. But one of the things you thought about having a strategy in place, or you had that sponsorship before you'd even published. The one thing that you didn't say, which you go, but it's obvious and not that obvious, is it all takes time and effort. And I think that's what everyone's poor on, time poor. I mean, I know myself especially, you probably get it all the time. I get it, I get it from so many people. You get it all the time. You should do this. I get that so much. Even in my previous careers, you should do this. And I'm like, no, I know, but like, I can only do this. With enough time and enough energy, I can do anything. So I think with that, like even the cross promotion stuff, like everything you're saying, I think is 110%. Creating a pitch deck. It's just one of these things, like people have said that to me, you should do this. I'm like, I literally don't have the time to go on Canva or whatever it is and make a pitch deck. I know I should be contacting other podcasts to ask for cross promotion. I don't have time to do that. So that's what I mean. Like if you want to do it, you absolutely can. It's just then you have to be like, okay, I'm committing 100% to this. But what would be your quickest wins, your quickest and easiest wins? Because like I know these things, well, everything's easy, right? That's the thing. Everything's easy. It's easy to ask for cross promotion. What would be the quickest, the most efficient, easy wins in the beginning if you want to build your audience?
I mean, easy win. If we're saying easy in terms of getting a feature, but maybe not a guarantee, but
I mean time. Sorry, I mean I don't mean I don't mean easy. I mean most efficient. What's the quickest way? Sorry, not easy. If the quickest way.
yeah. So I guess to your larger note, you build routines. Just like we know that to brush your teeth, you're probably going to spend a minute in the morning and a minute at night to do that. And you know it's happening every day because you know it's important. And building that routine, it just comes secondhand. You may even forget you're brushing your teeth and you're already out the door in the morning. It's rote, it's routine. The same thing should be with your, same thing should take place with your production strategy, your marketing strategy, and what you're doing for your podcast growth and your goals. So if you're saying that in a year from now or 5 years from now, you want to get featured on Apple Podcasts, or you want to be interviewed on a certain show, or mentioned in a newsletter or a blog, have that goal in mind and then go back to the very beginning. What is the first thing you should do now to work towards that end goal? Because it is going to take a little bit of time, very likely. And it's going to take a little bit of energy or a little bit of routine to get there. So for first easy steps, I would say it's one, making sure that the base information of your show, your marketing copy, your presence is established, it's ready to go. And by established, I mean, again, taking maybe 10, 15, 30 minutes on a certain day of the week and looking at what you have available. So if you are trying to figure out how to describe your show to someone to make it ear-catching, eye-catching, captivating, someone that's going to receive a pitch from you is going to look at this and say, yeah, that sounds great. I want to feature them or talk to the host. Then take that time, set it aside, and whether you're using maybe an AI tool to help you with inspiring copy and language, and you can make it more human after the fact, get that in place. Likewise with your visual branding, take that time to make sure that is solidified with your episode artwork, your podcast show artwork, your episode titles, your episode copy. So that's the foundational elements of when someone is going to see you for the first time. They're likely not going to hear you for the first time if they're someone that's maybe in a major media network or another podcast. They're likely seeing your email or your description. And that's going to make them, just like a resume and application for a job, that's going to make them say, okay, now I want to explore this further and discuss this option with you. So have that in place. And then after that, for an easy win, then I would just build off of that with take 5-10 minutes each week and do a search and build out a spreadsheet of the names of people in the industry, in the podcast industry, with shows, publishers, or people who write about podcasts or write about your topic. Maybe they're a travel writer, and put their names and contact information down. You can find through Google or a social media search, and continue building out that list. And then at a certain point, start emailing them, following them on social media, telling them, hey, I'd love to connect. I have some ideas. I have a show that'd be a great fit. I would love to cross promo with you. And just build that up. 5 minutes a week, doing that every week. It can get you to the point where you might be on a first name basis with that writer and they know your work and now they're able to and ready to interview you.
That's a great one. And I think I would add to that, if you're going to spend that time with building up their emails and whatnot, reaching out to them, I would invite them on your show. If you have a travel show and you're reaching out to people in the travel industry, invite them on as a guest. That would be a great way. And then you get them to tag it, they're going to put it on LinkedIn. That can really help exponentially grow. Now, I've done my free advertising. I've got a little bit of budget now. I'm thinking of running some Facebook ads because I'm comfortable on Facebook. I know how to use Facebook. So how much should I spend on Facebook ads and how does that work?
Here's a question for you. Why Facebook? Why Facebook ads?
I'm just comfortable with it. I just know it's the only social media platform I know. So I'll just use that.
Is that where your audience is though? Are they on Facebook or are they on a different platform?
Probably because I'm on it. So they must be on it. Yeah.
You think so?
I'm being facetious.
And that's the thing. And that's why this isn't just a pinpoint you, Neil. This is a larger, I think this is the same kind of scenario that I would encourage everyone listening to have for themselves. That like questioning of why am I choosing this platform to cross promo with, to do paid spend with, if it's a social media platform, an email newsletter. If you already have an audience, then I would encourage you to actually ask your audience, like truly do a poll, create a Google form or a survey for free and say, hey, audience, I have a quick survey. I'd love for you to fill it out. It's 5 questions. I want to know, what is your favorite social media platform? Where do you go for news and information? How did you find out about our podcast to begin with? If you've been a longtime listener or a new fan. And that information, especially if you incentivize it, like, hey, I'll give you a shout out on the next podcast episode if you fill this out. That information directly from your current audience will give you an indication of the ways in which you should spend your money and time on different platforms with paid or earned marketing in the future. Because your assumption that they use Facebook like you is fine, but that might not be the case. So if you want to spend the time and money experimenting with a Facebook ad or whatever, you can do that. But knowing that information directly from the mouth of your listener is so important. Now, when it comes to Facebook ads, I would just say this. We actually don't do social media ads. We have found it more effective to focus our efforts for paid spend budgets in podcasts and in podcast apps, because those 2 places are immediately where your podcast listeners are, right? You don't need to educate them on what a podcast is. They're listening to it. They're in the podcast app right now. They are listening to a podcast on their run, on their commute. So that is the easiest hurdle to overcome, is not having to over-explain, hey, listen to my podcast. By the way, let me give you a 10-second information cycle on what a podcast is and where to find it. So we found the best success when we've been promoting podcasts and other podcasts. And honestly, I would encourage anyone here to think of that as well. Email newsletters can also work just fine. But social media has now come to a point where you just have to put a lot of money into ads. And if you're promoting a podcast, you can probably use that money elsewhere and get better results.
No, I 100% agree that it makes me laugh. I like to think of advertising as a little bit of a Ponzi scheme, because if you see an ad or hear an ad for a podcast on a podcast asking you to listen to another podcast, and I'm like, they've spent money to advertise on this podcast so that they can get a bigger audience. So then they can have people pay for ads on their podcast to listen to another podcast, and it just keeps going. And but it is the reason why most ads I hear anyway on podcasts are for other podcasts.
I think it's just the way of the commercial world, right? I mean, even going back to the Coke analogy at the very start, Coke advertises at the Olympics, or another brand will partner with Coke like Fortnite to advertise on Coke bottles. So if anything, it's just a chain of content and interest and brands from one to the next that helps us learn what we like and don't like and how we want to move our interest and money in one direction or another. But I think if anything, people may be thinking like, oh, I hate hearing ads on podcasts. Like, I don't want to be part of like a 2-minute or 10-minute span of ads in a podcast feed. No one listens to that. People do listen to ads, especially if they're host-read. Host-read ads, like your favorite host reading something that promotes your show or another brand, has more of an affinity for that audience to say, my favorite host just was, Conan O'Brien did an amazing ad read for like Airbnb. And actually, I'm kind of wanting to learn more about Airbnb, or like maybe do it next time, or use their code and support the show and go to Airbnb for it. So just know that even though, like, yes, there are certain podcasts and networks that are running a ton of ads when they probably could reduce them for the audience sake, there are more people listening to podcasts and the ads in them than you think. And a lot of people listen to a lot of podcasts. So someone, like I have a friend who listens to probably 100 different podcasts in a week's time, all different shows and genres. So, just because you're promoting another show or brand on your show, that is probably going to make that person say, oh yeah, I want to add that to my queue of other shows because they love audio that much.
Yeah, work. Well, so if someone wants to start off with advertising, what would you say is the minimum budget to start with to make a dent? I'm not talking about anything massive, but I also want to hone in. You said advertise on other podcasts, right? And I remember when I heard this for the first time, and I was like, I don't even know what that means. How do you do that? Like, how do you do that? And let's be honest, what would be a minimum budget spend you would recommend to somebody to make a little bit of a dent, to start to see an increase?
Yeah. Well, again, you could do cross promotions with another show that's effectively advertising your show and theirs, but it's reciprocity. You're promoting their show and yours, and that's free. Now, the thing about that is that it's with the assumption that it's equitable. So with a cross promo, if you're saying, hey, let's do 10,000 impressions, can you, with your show currently, offer 10,000 impressions or 1,000 impressions and meet that expectation that the external show is also abiding by? If you can't, you could be creative with it. Or if you have budget, then that's where you can get into paid advertising of your show on another podcast. So we've had some clients, not all of our clients have paid spend budgets. Some do though. And those budgets range from, let's say, $1,000 all the way up to 6 figures, 7 figures. It really depends on what they want to allocate. So if anything, if you're starting out, I would encourage you to first try to do cross promos. If you can be creative with it. So maybe you also promote the show on your social media in addition to the podcast feed. So that way you have a total impression count like between the two platforms. But if you do have budget, podcast apps, Podcast Addict is one of them, Pocket Cast as well. You can buy an ad on these podcast apps that could amount to like $100 to a few $1,000s to promote your show on their main home screen of their app to a subgenre like the history section of their app. So very affordable, and conversion rates are good. Or you can do a podcast audio ad in another show. Again, CPMs may vary, depends on how popular they are. Depends if they have attribution tracking, so you can see the success of the ad beyond looking at your downloads and saying, oh, I think I see a spike, and that was, I think, when I saw the ad running in their feed. But you could do that as low as maybe a few $100s all the way to a few $1,000s. Ask whatever show you want to do an ad on and say, hey, what's your rate card? What's your CPM? What are your flight dates where the ad could be running on? Do you accept pixels for attribution tracking? Is this a host read ad where your host of the show is reading it? Or is this a pre-produced spot or producer read ad? As I would recommend host read. That's really the most bang for your buck with having your favorite host read your ad, and see where you go from there.
You can tell why you're the senior vice president of marketing for podcasting. There is a lot to dig in. You can see why people get overwhelmed, scared about it. Someone has to do one thing right now after this podcast. What do they do?
But the actual big thing I would encourage anyone here is don't be overwhelmed. Don't be discouraged. Podcasting, just like Rome, is not built overnight in vast majority of cases. So if you can focus on one thing that you can start doing today or this week, even if it's for a few minutes, do that, build that routine, and continue to optimize it and iterate on it. And also grow relationships in the field. In addition to building out that list of folks you want to pitch your podcast to for interviews, features, promotions, also think of the folks that you want to connect with to learn from. So on our website, we actually have that list that Neil was referencing of like the best podcasts about podcasts, the best podcast newsletters to follow, the best people on social media to follow that are in the podcast space. Find those resources, follow them, follow those people, connect with them, learn from them, ask them questions, find ways to collaborate, because even though it feels like you're just talking to a microphone by yourself, there's actually a community digitally that would love to support you or connect with you and grow together in the process.
Really perfect. And on that note, go to 7millionbikes.com. There's a button right there that says talk to Neil. Send me a message. I would love to hear from you. Any questions that you have, I can help you out with that, and maybe we can start working together as well. Joni, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. I'm flattered to be on your list. I feel privileged to be able to talk to you today. It's everything I say about podcasting. You're able to connect, meet with people that I was telling somebody just yesterday, if you just message someone and be like, hey, do you want to talk for an hour? They'd probably be like, hell no, I don't want to talk for an hour. But if you're like, you want to be on my podcast for an hour, and we get to share so much information, and I've learned so much from this. So thank you so much for coming on Smarter Podcasting.
Thanks for inviting me. It was a pleasure to be here too.
You are very welcome. And remember, rate, review, subscribe, and best of all, share this podcast with someone else who wants to make the best podcast possible. And if you want to work with me, I would love to work with you. Thank you very much for listening, watching, whatever you're doing. Cheers.